Hey everyone, this is Chris from the StageLeft Podcast. Welcome to new listeners, and welcome to our friends who've been around for a while now, listening to our in-depth interviews with some of the unsung heroes of the music industry, the StageLeft musicians. Today we have Clive Deamer, who, if you've watched any Radiohead shows in the last 7 or 8 years, you would have seen him play on pretty much every single song. In a live capacity. He's also recorded with Radiohead and was the drummer for Portishead as well, and played on all their records, and he's really revealing and insightful about how they grasp some of those really unique drum sounds on the likes of Dummy, and actually latterly playing on some Radiohead songs in the studio as well, which is kind of cool. Thanks so much to Clive for doing this. Absolute joy to have him over, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Just so you know about the podcast, if you've not listened before, we're here to provide free educational content for young musicians to enter the industry. The arts funding's been ripped out in the UK, and tuition fees have gone up, and there could be some musicians who could do with a bit of advice and guidance, like to David Bowie, Thom Yorke, and Blur, for instance, all went to university under free tuition fees at the time, and now that's not the case. So this is hopefully to try and plug the gap and support young musicians if we can. This is something I do away from 2 other jobs, so if you want to donate to help us buy the equipment we need and buy us a coffee, you can do that at StageLeftPodcast.com. And one other thing that's worth quickly mentioning, we just started a new venture, which is StageLeft Nights, which is, if you're based in the UK, in London, in Vauxhall at my place, we're doing an event where you have a 5-course meal, which is cooked by Dovila Uaza Pavachute, who is a very highly respected chef, works at an amazing restaurant in King's Cross that recently got a very rare 5-star review, because rare as in the reviewer doesn't give 5-star reviews, and is an amazing chef. And what we do is do a 5-course meal. We have a guest on the podcast who's been on before, and it's kind of music themed, so there'll be a bit of live music, so there'll be a performance there as well, and everyone's got to bring a vinyl, and it's a kind of vinyl playback, and we like to ask the guests why this record is particularly of interest. And it's just a few drinks and a good quality food and company, and that's taking place in London. And we've got some pretty cool people who are lined up to attend that as well. James from Star Sailor, the singer of Star Sailor. We have Gold Heart Assembly are going to be doing a show, and there's other guests who've actually showed quite a big interest in doing this as well. So if you want to get involved, it's going to be £50 a ticket, which actually is pretty good value for a 5-course meal of that standard and a live performance. And if you book it as 2, it's £90 a ticket. £90 for the pair. And you'll be able to find that out by following us on Instagram at the StageLeft Podcast, following us on Facebook at facebook.com/StageLeft Podcast, and on Twitter as well, which is at the StageLeft Pod. You can send us an email if you're interested as well to register your interest, and that email address is StageLeft Nights. So StageLeft, all one word, and Nights attached to it as well, at gmail.com. So StageLeftNights at gmail.com. And we'll be in touch. Okay, that's enough from me. I hope you enjoy the episode, and make sure that you follow us on all the social media outlets if you can, and support us and subscribe and share. It makes our lives a lot easier if you can help out on that part. So, okay, enjoy the episode. This is Clive Deamer. Okay, welcome to the StageLeft Podcast, lifting the veil on the music industry by telling the stories of those with a unique vantage point. This podcast exists to provide free educational content for young musicians entering an increasingly complex industry by telling the stories of some of the unsung heroes behind the success. Go to the StageLeftPodcast.com for all episodes featuring musicians who discuss in detail the recording, writing and performing processes with the likes of Elvis Presley, Fleetwood Mac, Michael Jackson, the Beatles and many more. There you'll find Wolfgang Fleur of Kraftwerk discussing the moment he co-created the world's first ever electronic drum set, Tony Visconti on the crazy production techniques used to record David Bowie's final album Black Star, and the comedian Stuart Lee on how his writing process derived from watching freestyle jazz artists. Today we're joined by Clive Deamer, an original session player but regular creative fixture since in the pioneering trip-hop act Portishead, who amongst many successes were the winners of the Ivor Novello for outstanding contribution to music. But that's just a start, because Clive has toured for 6 years and played on 2 albums by Robert Plant, before a short pause in his career led to questions that all musicians get. When is the next call coming? Do I have a future in this industry? As Clive pondered that, Phil Selway rang him explaining that 15 Step was just too complex to play live on his own, and since then Clive has played enormous live shows, a second live drummer with the most critically acclaimed band of its generation, the Colossus that is Radiohead. Today we're discussing all of that, as well as how Tai Chi helped Clive contribute to a Mercury-winning album by Ronnie Size, how the dynamics work between he and the rest of Radiohead, memories of Dummy, and we'll see if Clive can correctly guess the song that Phil Selway's sister sang to me at karaoke moments before radio took the stage at Pyramid Stage at Headline Glastonbury last year. So it's a pleasure to say that our guest down the StageLeft Podcast is none other than Clive Deamer, and thanks for joining us today, Clive. How's it going?
I'm an unsung hero.
You are?
Apparently. I had no idea. Thank you for inviting me, Chris. It's great to be here. I just have to quickly correct you. The reason it wasn't 15 Step was the track. Really? The track that was the key track that got them to call me was Bloom.
Bloom.
The King of Limbs album.
Right. And so what was that?
But we have played 15 Step many times.
Many times.
So yeah.
Good stuff. Thank
along
you.
with a lot of other tracks too.
Thank you very much. So you've just come back from US a couple of...
USA, yeah. We've just finished the last tour and 4 nights at Madison Square Gardens, mostly all on the East Coast. Right. And it was great, absolutely fantastic. I mean, it felt like and seemed like we were playing better than ever. Tom's singing was amazing as ever, particularly amazing, I would say, consistently throughout all the shows. Yeah.
What does he do to look after his voice? You know, I mean, for a young singer listening, I mean, his voice is just so incredible.
Yeah.
Does he?
Well, him and Ed O'Brien, both him and Ed O'Brien, because Ed's got his work cut out doing harmonies and stuff, and they both do extensive warm up and a warm down after the show. They take a lot of. They're very disciplined about that. So you'll hear them doing, amusing scales half an hour before the show, if not longer.
In harmony together?
Sometimes you get some great moments where one of them's in there in different rooms or they're moving around through corridors, and you hear these fantastic moments where they're doing scales or something, or breathing, just, sound things, and sometimes they musically converge in a very interesting way. They just get on, do their own thing, but when you hear them both do it at the same time, it's quite funny.
And what's a warm down process for a vocalist?
Just the same thing. Just kind of go through scales and relax the muscles and it's taking care of that instrument. I guess that whole thing of warming it up, getting it ready, so that you're not going out there and hitting the first tune and going and stressing your throat without having got it ready. Much like drummers will practice on a pad, or if someone's got a particularly hard thing to play on a guitar, they'll warm up a bit.
What's your warm up process for the?
With them, I take a little small flight case, and I have a very very humble practice drum kit, which is a snare drum stand with a wooden pad on the top, a rubber, a traditional pad, a hi-hat with the Gen 16 Zildjian cymbals with the holes drilled out,
right.
A cymbal, and a bass drum pad, a practice pad, and I just have a music stand in front of me, and I have like the stick control book or four-way coordination exercises, and I'll work on that most days, sometime in the afternoon or before we go on stage, just to kind of dust off my chops a bit, and just to keep plugging away at little things I might be interested in developing.
What about avoiding injuries and stuff like that, tendinitis?
Well, my technique is pretty good now. I mean, I've been working at it for what is it now, over 40 years. So, and because I started off as a very hard-hitting rock drummer. I mean, I used to demolish drums, literally. And then I've got quieter and quieter and quieter over the years for various reasons. And so now I use the smallest drumstick you can get, which is the Hal Blaine, the Zildjian artist Hal Blaine model.
Right.
But it's my favourite stick. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Most drummers will pick it up and think, my God, it's like a skinny little knitting needle matchstick, you know. But for me, it works, and I'm not putting any extra energy into the playing than necessary. So I don't get blisters. I don't really get any aches and pains, really. Just nothing to speak of. Nothing that I can't spot, you know.
And when you've seen that in other drummers, what is it that they've particularly been doing wrong? Is it the fact they've not been warming up? Is it a case that they've got?
I can see a lot of drummers who are half my age who, like 15 minutes in, are sweating and they're struggling to play because they're putting 500% energy into something that should take a lot less energy because they're overplaying it and they're playing so loud. It's great if you want to play loud. If that's what you need to do, fine. But a lot of drummers just burn themselves out and make life difficult for themselves because they're overplaying. They're putting far too much. They're not balancing the energy level and the sound balance of what they're playing. So they struggle. They get halfway through the tour and they're knackered. They find it a real difficult, you know.
Because you said in the past you can play powerfully but not loud. That's a quote from you.
Yeah.
How do you do it? Like,
well, power and volume are not exactly always the same things.
Yeah.
You can make something sound powerful without it necessarily being really loud.
Yeah.
There was, you know, like I said, balancing the power of the drum kit. Obviously, that has to do with the way you tune your drums and what drum sound you're working with. But when I worked with Jeff Beck many years ago, we were rehearsing to do bits and pieces. And one of the things he noticed was like, wow, yeah, you've got all that R&B, that swingy chop stuff together, but it's not too loud because a lot of, like Terry Bozzio, it's super loud. A lot of those guys, they play really, really loud. Now that's okay, but if you're playing the piano and you're playing the other instrument, you've got to stand in the room next to the guy doing that. You've got to remember that has an effect on people's hearing and the way that they react with you.
Yeah.
So if you're making an absolute din every time you play, it won't be long before someone says, can you play a bit quieter? Or my favourite way of putting it is, when was the last time you ever heard anybody in a band turn around to the drummer and say, hey, can you play it a bit louder? So think of it on those terms, you know.
What about when playing with Robert Plant then? Because I'm guessing, I know he did some quite experimental stuff post Led Zeppelin, but on those tours he must have played some Zeppelin tunes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So was it a bit of a kind of an internal conflict for how you were going to play that?
Well, all the Zepp tunes we did, we almost always sort of, you know, slanted them in or reinterpreted them. I mean, I was doing things where I was mixing up. I mean, the Bonzo thing is particularly interesting for me because I came to understand Bonzo's playing by not playing any. When I started, I was a rock drummer, and then I became completely disinterested in rock music because for me it was mostly so boring, so 4/4, straight, square, and predictable in many ways. And I moved away from that, and I just wanted to play jazz and blues.
That's because you saw B.B. King live, is that
I
right?
saw B.B. King live. There were other people that I was working with a bit, but when I saw B.B. King at Colston Hall in the 80s, and before that I was into Louis Jordan, a lot of early, you know, American music from that period. So I was already heading that way a bit, and then when I saw B.B. King live, that was it. That was the moment I thought, I just want to play shuffles. Anything that swings and shuffles, that's what I want to do. And I'm sorry, where was I going with this? What were we talking about? Oh yeah, so then I ended up doing a lot of that, and then I joined a band called the Big Town Playboys, and with them I discovered Earl Palmer, who's one of my favourite drummers of all time, and his playing influenced John Bonham. In fact, so the beginning of Rock and Roll, that track, that's I'm pretty sure that's Earl Palmer playing on the Keep It Knockin'.
Right.
Little Richard.
Yeah. Oh.
Keep on knocking, but you can't come in. That's Earl Palmer, who directly influenced Bonzo. And I was playing that stuff. Robert Plant saw Big Town Playboys, so he could see where I was at. He could see, you know. So when I got to play with Robert years later, I'd already visited that musical genre in a way that not many people get to play like that, you know. And that band was very authentic, a 50s R&B band. So it wasn't difficult for me to hang on to that and then bring it back into playing the Zepp tunes. But we also had a North African influence going on. And they connect because a lot of the shuffles in that and the way the rhythms move there's a similarity. So that's what I was doing. I was mixing up Bonzo, Earl Palmer, some North African things from Justin Adams' input into the band.
And going back to your processes on the day of kind of warming up and that kind of thing, when you're on stage, so firstly, what's your setup? What's your kind of kit that you've got there? And secondly, what is it that you need to feel happy to go on stage in regards to monitors and stuff like that? What is it that you need?
Okay, so I'm lucky now. I've got a lot of different drum kits. So I picked the drum kit for the gig, obviously for the music. I might put different heads and retune the kit to suit what we're playing. But essentially, it's mostly basic drum kits for me. I might have just a standard kit, maybe with an extra floor tom, 3 cymbals, maybe 4 cymbals. Nearly all the time now, I always have a Roland SPD SX, it's pretty simple. As I said, I do a bit of warm up stuff that will either be directly related to something I know I'm going to play that I need to do a little bit of extra warm up for.
What might that be? Have been on the last
what might that be? So 15 steps a good example.
Right, okay.
So 15 step, in one sense, it's my part that I play in it. I play the kind of the drum machine part that's on the record. So and because it's in 5, there's a simple pattern that I play. That's the easy bit, and then there's like an 8 bar or a 12 bar breakdown, and then I have to kind of solo a little bit in 5/4. That sounds interesting, but it doesn't send the rest of the band into pandemonium of where the one's gone. So there's that sort of stuff. So I might practice with a click track in 5/4 a bit and just play that pattern and just get my brain back into the feeling of 5/4 so that I'm ready. I've got a good feeling of I can pull up the feeling of that track on demand when we play it. And then other things that I do.
You got a lot of percussion. You use a lot of percussion.
I do a lot of percussion with Radiohead, which is so. Once they were adding more and more old stuff from all the old albums, anything that was obviously percussion on the record, I was playing that. And then I was doing more percussion because they wanted me to be on the kit on stage all the way through the whole show, even if I'm on the tracks where I'm not playing kit. So I would invent some percussion things slowly. Bit by bit, I'd find good sounds to add in that didn't sound, some things that would sound appropriate and added something, Other than that, my approach is very simple. I mean, I have really, really simple rules about monitoring levels. I still only just use one wedge, and all I have in that wedge is what I absolutely need. I don't have any of myself other than a tiny bit of bass drum. And anything that's too far away to be heard acoustically, I'll have that in my monitor if I really need to hear it. So my stage level, my volume level on stage is as low as it can be.
Right. Nice.
So that, again, I'm not wasting energy competing with a load of volume that I don't need to have. And it means it helps my hearing. If it gets too loud and you've got ringing ears every night after a gig, that's too loud. So
what would that have been on there? So I'm guessing bass. So you would Collins bass come.
The bass is right next to me.
So you don't.
There's no problem hearing that. Yeah. In fact, one of the biggest problems when you play gigs that big is the noise of the audience. The sound level of the audience reacting is amazing. How much sound that takes up.
Wow.
So that's one of the things that you also have to learn to cope with on big gigs. You can do the sound check. Once there's 40,000 people going nuts, it's amazing how they can drown out sounds that you thought you'd be able to hear. So that is a monitoring thing. And if you've got a good monitor guy, they will advise you on where your levels ought to be roughly.
Yeah.
But it's still about making good choices. I'd much rather miss out a few synthesizer sounds and other bits and pieces, but be able to hear the really important things. So that's going to be... So again, 15 step. So 15 step, when we first started playing it, I was just playing it in I am a machine mode. I would just play the part and pretend I'm the machine, programmed and played it like that. It worked fine for about 5 gigs. And then, because Thom is a very freewheeling kind of singer, he never sings anything the same twice. He's always playing around with it. He then started to say, it's good, but now it's a bit too static. So we ran it in a sound check, and I asked the monitor guy to put Thom's vocal up a bit louder in my wedge, and I noticed how he was playing around with the placement of the lyric. So instead of just being machine-like, I started to play exactly the same part, but just reacting tiny amounts to the way that he was singing, and that worked perfectly, and that's what we've done ever since. So there's an example.
Beautiful.
So on that track, I've got his vocal quite loud, and I'm doing my thing, but I'm trying to stay right. I'm trying to second guess his vocal footprint as he's singing it in real time, and that works. Now the track might be a different thing. I might suddenly need to hear his acoustic guitar really loud above everything else.
Yeah.
Or I might need to hear something that Johnny's playing, Planet Telex, for example. There's a
So does your sound guy who's doing the monitors have kind of a setup for every different?
Yeah, I mean most of those monitors. Yeah, because most digital desks now they just save.
Yeah.
They save the memory of the levels. Bang, they hit the button, it goes to that. So it should be exactly as it was in the sound check, but like I just said, don't forget, once you're on the gig and you've got 40,000 people going nuts, it's going to sound very different again. So one of the things that I think that young musicians need to realise is that the desire to hear a perfect sound of what you think you're playing, and this is live and in studio as well, you actually, a lot of the time, it's only occasionally you get to hear it the way you'd really like to hear it, or the way you would expect you might hear it. You're almost always having to live with a compromised version of the sound balance, because there's always something that's going to get in the way or be a problem. If you have it, try to get some kind of high fidelity mix for yourself. You'll be extremely lucky if you ever get to pull it off consistently. I'm always having to imagine the parts. Like I said earlier, you want to get the stuff that's really important that you're playing to. If you can get anything else in there, great. But once you start trying to put more and more in, you're actually then creating more problems.
That's so true. I mean, I've played like hundreds of gigs, and like you're right, you never actually get the perfect sound you want on stage.
No.
And I think maybe once that's ever happened and walked off stage, people are like, yeah, it sounded shit out front.
Yeah, and there's always that. Yeah, and when you have a great gig, everyone else says, oh, it was terrible, or vice versa. I mean, the best one, of course, is acoustic gigs. When you play a little acoustic gig, which is why everybody loves playing little gigs, when it's acoustic and you have an acoustic balance and it's quiet, that's why those are so enjoyable, because you've got a real time, just a natural acoustic understanding of what you're playing to. And if you can play that level, those are often way more satisfying than playing Madison Square Garden.
One of the really cool things about Radiohead is the fact they change their set list so frequently. So I went to 2 nights in a row.
Night.
Yeah, every night. I went to
Always.
Yeah. I went to 2 nights in a row at Victoria Park a few years ago, and they just, one night they played one set and they didn't play one song again. Like the second night is absolutely brilliant. Yeah. Does that throw you? How does that impact your preparation? Because some of the songs they haven't played for quite a long time, and they throw it in. So do you need to learn the whole back catalogue, or do they give you some notice beforehand?
So initially there was a lot of rehearsal, and then some more rehearsal, done in chunks, and but there was a funny moment at one time, I can't remember exactly when it was now, but Thom came in with these pages and pages of A4 with all these songs written down, so hundreds of songs, and it was funny watching the conversation about why that song should be in and that, not that, and but there was a massive list, and so so consequently in those initial rehearsals I ended up with loads of bits of paper with scrawl and me writing notes for myself about what I was playing, what I wasn't playing, blah blah blah, and it was a mess, and then finally I acquired an iPad. And then I condensed all that information down into one app where I've got every song is song title, so it might say something like, it just might say pads, so I'm only playing pads on it, 15 step for example, I keep talking about that track, or it might say real kit, blue maracas, tambourine, it might say, it's really simple, just a couple of words, and I can look at that one line, it'll have a program number for anything that's on my pads, or a tempo thing, and I can just look at that little strip. It'll be one line of text, and one glance at that, and I know what I'm supposed to be doing. Because when they're like a pack of cards, because it's shuffled every night, you can't. You're kept on your toes, which is why they do it.
Yeah.
But if you have a moment where you suddenly, when the song title suddenly appears and you can't remember what you're playing, that's why I had to have that system.
Good.
But once I got it in the iPad, it was great. And the other good thing is because the iPad is always there as a light source, You could always see it. So even when the stage lights go dark, you could still see your set. And those vital seconds where you've got to change from the last tune and be ready for the next one. And I'm changing snare drums as well. I mean, for years now, I've always taken like 2 or 3 snare drums and I swap them over. My snare drum cradle is always just slightly open, so I can just drop a snare drum in.
And when do you find out what the set list is? How long before?
That can be changed even as late as half an hour before the show, even
really?
later than that sometimes. Yeah, but it's usually sorted out in the middle of the afternoon and agreed upon. And there might be one tune. They'll always do an encore, maybe 2 encores, and those can get shuffled around at the last minute.
And how do they decide? What's the
loads of different factors. It could be to do with the tunes that they played the last time in that venue. It could be to do with things going on that day that might make a particular track relevant. It might be to do with just the energy and the feeling of a tune that got played in the sound check that they haven't done for months, but played it that afternoon. It was like, wow, that sounded great, let's put it in. Or the other way around. The tunes we've been playing for 2 weeks, suddenly it doesn't. Why is that tune not sounding so great now? Let's ditch that. Put something else in. So that's like that. It's like fresh ingredients or something. Like a chef. What have we got to cook with today? Oh, that's looking a bit. No, that doesn't look good enough. That's looking a bit wilted.
It's the way to do it. It's the way to do it because it keeps you on your toes. And as a fan, it's great. I mean, there was this thing that a while ago it said that when U2 decide to change their set list, they need to give like 2 weeks' notice and stuff like that because of such a ridiculous production. You know what you're going to be seeing every time. So it's really
the Radiohead production is not small. It's big. And if you watch the show, the crew guys, they're amazing. I mean, the way that they have streamline the operation so that the piano gets wheeled on stage within seconds. They've got it down to a fine art. They're great at it. So they have to work hard too.
Great. Let's talk about on-stage communication. So one thing that's really been nice about watching Radiohead over the years, prior to you joining, and actually it's interesting what the dynamic is now, is the body positioning of Colin when he's playing bass, and he kind of turns in, and it's a relationship between him and Phil. And he kind of doesn't always turn out to the front. It's almost like they're really working together on getting that groove. Did he have to kind of change that with having 2 percussionists?
What happened was when we first started, there was this question of how are we going to lay the stage out with the 2 drum kits? Where are we going to? And for years I've been a fan of playing one side of the stage. I don't particularly like being in the middle at the back, the traditional spot. So I suggested to them, I said, well, why don't we do, the drum kits sort of slightly, both pointing towards the centre mic, but we're apart and Colin's in the middle. So we tried it in a production rehearsal. And once Colin found himself standing between the 2 drum kits, and he realised that if he took 1 step to the left, he could hear more of me. 1 step to the right, he could hear more of Phil. For him, it was fantastic because depending on whether it's me or Phil playing the principal drum part or whatever, or if it's both of us doing a simultaneous thing, it was easy for him to adjust his position to take in the information he needs. Whether it's watching one of us or hearing both or hearing more of one than the other. So that drove that decision.
And what about communicating on stage? Is it all just kind of non-verbal cues and that kind of thing, or is it just not needed? I guess. I mean, is there? Do you have talkback mics?
No, I don't have any talkback. No, there's very little. Most of it's everybody knows what they're doing.
Fair enough.
There's a couple. I mean, there's like odd particular things where they'll always have me count certain things in, or. There's the odd little moment where a cue comes and somebody, giving you looking at you going, God eye, and go, yeah, now, that kind of thing. No, it's well rehearsed. Everybody knows what they're doing. Like on any tour, you've got to get your stuff together and remember what you're doing.
You once described the gig that you played on the Park stage at Glastonbury. You said you'd done all the rehearsing, but you felt that was the audition, and you beautifully described it as the potting the black ball moment. And what advice would you give to a musician to thrive in those conditions when they know it's a high pressure gig?
Yeah.
What this could do for your career going forward, all that kind of stuff. If this really works out well, how do you thrive in that environment and not kind of let that tense you up?
Good question. I mean, obviously, to a certain extent, if you're at that moment, you will already have done a lot of work. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there. So really, the high pressure gig where it's potting the black, that moment where it's right at the end of the game, and if you screw up that shot, you throw the game. So it really is a kind of you've got to stop thinking. To a certain extent, you forget about everything that led before. Forget about you've got to stay in the moment after moment after moment. Remember what you've rehearsed, obviously, and pay it. You should. If you've done your preparation right, you should be ready. You just play the part. And you've got your notes or anything that were key pieces of information that you needed right there, down on the piece of paper on the floor or wherever you're doing it. It's being in the moment and enjoying it. I think that's what I always tend to do is just to remind myself, all right, it's 50,000 people, or someone said, guess who's in the audience, all that kind of thing. That can get to you. You can start thinking about that, and you've got to just remember that you're playing music, enjoy playing the music, enjoy the music, just be in there, be right in it, and give yourself completely to it, and just do it. Because even if you did screw up something a little bit, if you play it with full commitment, that will come across, and you'll sound great, and you'll make everyone else sound great. That's what counts. I mean, you learn that a lot when you play jazz gigs. Because on a jazz gig, it's not like playing pop or rock. It's about committing, and it's about letting your playing come out and engaging with what's happening. So in a way that's different, you have to play differently in those, like playing pop music. Pop music is all planned out. It's pretty obvious once you know the part. On a jazz situation, it's chaotic, it's creative, it stretches you, it catches you off guard, and you have to be ready to react. So you've got to be present fully.
Let's talk Tai Chi.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think it's quite interesting that you said that when you did the Ronnie Sires record, you said that you utilised some of the skills from Tai Chi. I love this, because those transferable skills. Can you go through that process? What was that? What happened with that?
So, roughly speaking, I'd always been in my earlier life, I mean, I'm in my 50s now, but in my earlier life, I've always been this kind of character of extremes, where I'd be cycling and running, and so on the one hand I'd be really, really quite fit, but then going out and boozing and smoking fags like you do when you're a musician, you live in that lifestyle. So as I got older, of course, as you do, and you start to realise that there are consequences for those. So then you start to try and get fit and all the rest of it. And then when what age was I? I don't know. I did it in my 20s, and then in my 30s I was doing martial arts, and it was a karate style based heavily on Tai Chi.
Yeah.
So it looked like karate, but it was actually based on the same principles of Tai Chi. And you'll see this. It's a bit corny. It's a bit of a corny way of describing it, but it makes the point. In some of the Bruce Lee movies, there are moments where he explains what I was just talking about being in the moment. But if your body is tense, I mean, all musicians know about it. All real players know that if your body is tense, you're going to restrict your playing technique. Most playing technique is about being relaxed and being aware where the real tension should be. So, the fingers or, the way that the limbs are used to play the instrument is terribly important that you're using them in an efficient manner. If you're using loads of muscle power, that's probably going to mess it all up. Well, it will do, almost certainly.
Yeah.
So in Tai Chi, most generally speaking, what you're doing is you're trying to get to a point where your arms, your legs, your limbs should feel like they're wires, and your hands are where the work is. So in karate, when you're making a blow or a punch, you have a clenched fist. So the clenched fist is clenched very tightly. So you imagine that's like a ball of steel or a rock. But your arm shouldn't be tense as well. If you ask people to clench their fist, they'll also clench up their arm, usually all the way up to the shoulder. So if you get them to clench their fist, but then ask them to give you their hand, hold their hand, and then waggle their arm, and you'll soon show them how tense they are. So then you have to learn through doing Tai Chi, you learn how to tense one part of your body, but let go of the other part, so that the movement is there, but the energy is in the fist, or in Tai Chi it's in the tension in the fingers, or whatever So I was starting to bring that into my playing, where I was becoming more and more aware of what my body was doing when I was playing. So I got to the point where all the normal things that a drummer would do, you're aware of your playing technique to a certain extent, but I was far more aware of what my shoulders and my arms were doing, and my back, and along with all the normal technique and practice that I was doing as a drummer, I was able to enhance that with what it feels like when you do Tai Chi. So when I started attempting to play drum and bass stuff, inspired by jungle music, before I met Ronnie, I was starting to get that awareness that I could play really fast and be utterly relaxed while I was doing it.
Wow.
It didn't feel like I had to put much energy into it at all. So when I met Ronnie and we first tried to do a few things, he was surprised to see that somebody could play that fast. And then when he realised that I could do that for hours, rehearse and then do a show, that's why it worked, you see. If I'd gone out, it's like the same thing I was talking about earlier. If I tried to play really loud and powerful, you wouldn't last more than an hour. You'd be sweating. You wouldn't be able to do it very long. You'd lock up. And I do it even better now. That was back in, when was that? 97. I was doing that, and I can play it better now because I continued to work at that. What's the question again? I've lost. So that's kind of it. Yeah. So breathing is part of that, and I'm not particularly aware of my breathing when I'm playing, but what it feels like to use your body in that way. Once you've experienced Tai Chi, and once when you do yoga like I do now, when you understand what it feels like to be truly relaxed, most people don't experience that unless they do one of those esoteric forms, Tai Chi, karate, yoga. If you do them for a while and put the work in, you come to rediscover your body in a new way, and you won't really get that from doing sports, not Western sports, because they don't teach you those things.
Fascinating. It's great how you could use that and in such a beneficial way. Let's talk Portishead. So as I mentioned just before we started recording, I was in Madrid last week with a very, very acclaimed songwriter called Ian Dench, who's previously been on the podcast, Oscar-nominated songwriter, and he got so excited when I said I was interviewing you, because he said, specifically, he said, how was it that the Portishead sound, particularly on Dummy, sounded like programming and a live kit at exactly the same time? What was that? How did that happen?
It's interesting, isn't it, the word programming? Because I suppose one way, there's various ways I could explain this. When we first started playing live gigs, although I missed some of their first gigs because I actually bust my leg. So when they first appeared, the very first time they were on Jules Holland, there was another guy playing drums. I was sat at home with a plaster cast on my leg. And Migueli was playing drums, and anyway, they did about a handful of gigs, and then I was fit enough to take over again. But of course, most people were expecting to see some kind of machine-based performance. When they basically saw a bass player, drummer, guitar, singer, keyboards, and Jeff doing. He had a couple of decks, so he was flying in some stuff in vinyl, and most people were really quite surprised to see that, because when you boil it all down, that's what those records are made of. The recording process, was all the bog standard things. Choice of microphones, where they were put on the drum kit, the way the kit is tuned, the way it's played, and then the processing of those sounds that they then put those through. So there was an awful lot of to tape, to vinyl, sample back off, but, and this is, don't forget, this is kind of before a lot of what everybody now has in terms of Pro Tools and Audio Logic is just a little bit before that. So it's really about the processing of sound and the EQing of sound. The greatest part of the Portishead sound is the fact that a lot of the sub bass that everybody takes for granted now, they don't use. A lot of the top end, the high end that most people use in all music is taken away. They deal mostly in mids, the mid frequencies, including gigs as well. The other thing is, my kit, my old vintage Gretsch kit that I had for donkey's years from a guy called Steve Garner in Assembly Music. I bought that kit in the late 80s. And it's a fabulous drum kit because, to me, Gretsch kits are like pianos. If you play them softly, you get a different tonality and a different timbre to when you hit it with power. And a lot of modern drum kits don't have that. So that's why I use Gretsch kits. I had that. That was the one that we used on the record. I've used it. I still got it now, and I got more Gretsch kits now because Gretsch did a deal for me. And so that's part of it. The DMP7, the Yamaha DMP7, which is an 8-bit mixing desk. Ironically, a digital desk because it's 8-bit. The way they also brought that into the processing of the sound is a big part of the drum sound. There's many things in the Portishead audio construction that make it sound that way.
So when you were playing it, it didn't sound like it did on the record. Was it?
And the other thing I've often said many times is when we recorded those drum parts, they were recorded at tiny volume levels, really quiet. So imagine you had a drum kit in a house, and you knew that your family was sleeping upstairs, and you might try and play it. I was playing like that. The drumstick on the snare drum was moving about 2 inches.
Wow.
So super quiet. The microphones are in slightly unconventional places, but when you play that quiet, the amount of gain that you can take the mics up to means that what you're recording, you're getting far more into the microphones than somebody going crash bang wallop. Crash bang wallop recording on a drum kit means that you get all the top transients of the sounds, but a lot of the really interesting sound is lost. So I think a lot of the Motown records are recorded like that as well. Right. The drummers wouldn't have been playing very loud, and that's why they sound so great. It's like it's like an audio magnifying glass. When you record quiet and you take the gain up on the mic, it's like looking in a microscope and going right down, and you can see all the detail of something under a microscope. It's the audio version of that. So once you've recorded like that, once you start mixing it and EQing it and compressing it, you get far more for your buck, bang for your buck, for every little hit that you did on that drum take. That's why the drums sound so unusual.
It was groundbreaking, and it influenced a lot of people. I mean, what were your thoughts when you first heard? You must have heard "Climbing Up the Walls" by Radiohead, and the snare sound is exactly the same, and the beat is pretty much the same. So
those clanky kind of
that snare. Clanky, how did you get that snare sound? Can you remember? Was that
on
Numb?
On Numb. So again, as I said earlier, I can't remember exactly which ones, but all the various snare drums that I owned at the time, I still have them now. They were tuned, and a couple of Jeff had. Jeff is also famous between us in the band. What Jeff likes to do is, it's partly because he's a bloody cheapskate, but it's all because partly because it's a conscious choice. He has old drums with completely knackered drum heads on, but he tunes them and he records with that in mind. And he's got such a great ear, he's got such a great understanding of how to use audio and how to EQ and when to intervene with the sound, or when not to screw around with it. he can make. I think some of the original album tracks recorded on his snare drum with a completely knackered diplomat coated snare head, knackered, but it sounded good. The bass guitar on Dummy is a super cheap, like 80 quid bass, and yet it sounds fantastic because they put it through the right amp. It's all the old basics of recording that most people don't ever bother to learn. The right thing with the right mic in the right place, done the right way, with the right guy playing it the right way. All those things. They're all basic things. But if you've got someone who really understands how to deal with those variables, and you've got a strong creative sense of where you're going with it, that's the other big difference. When you're recording music that way, the sound of it is occurring in the monitors as you're doing it, as opposed to a lot of people, they kind of record it and go, well, that sounds all right. Yeah, when we mix, it'll sound completely different, and it does. When you make a record with someone like Portishead, you're hearing it the way it's almost certainly going to be by the time it's finished.
So the first album was obviously hugely successful and critically acclaimed. What advice would you give to someone going into a second album process in regards to, was there any external influences that said, we want you to create this record again, or we want you to put singles on there? Like, is there, you ever been in a situation? I couldn't
really answer that. I mean, I wasn't, I've never been a member of Portishead.
Yes.
I'm not a member of Portishead.
Yeah.
I'm not a member of Radiohead. I'm an independent session drummer.
Yeah,
I'm a freelancer. So I don't, those kind of conversations I wouldn't have been privy to. But if anything, in fact, of all the people that there are out there, I can tell you that if anyone had said to Portishead, oh, so can you make this next record like even more trip-hoppy, or make it even more da-da-da, whatever, they would have gone, oh, F you.
Yeah,
because of all the bands around, that the fact that Dummy exists because they were doing entirely what they believed they should do, based on what they liked and more importantly what they disliked about popular music at the time, and nothing has changed on that front, which is why they take so long to do new work. They will not compromise on their principles on that front.
And Robert Plant, what would a musician learn from working with Robert Plant that they would
Gin
learn
and tonic,
from him?
mostly.
Gin and tonic, right. What would they learn from working with him that they might not learn from working with anyone else?
I think what I learned from playing with Robert was to be bold, be fearless. If you get a strong sense of something to play, do it, commit. Like I was saying, commit to it and do it wholeheartedly. When we were doing shows with him, there were times that I would suddenly get an idea in the middle of playing one of the Zepp tunes, and I'd suddenly throw in a new idea that wasn't there, up to that point. And if you can pull it off and you make it work, then he'd be the first to slap you on the back at the end of the gig. And if you screw it up, of course he'd try to give you hell for it. You take the mickey,
Right.
But if you've got an idea and you're confident you can pull it off, do it.
And is that a message he gave you, or was it just something you sensed over time?
It was learnt through just by doing it, by taking the risk and pulling it off, because you're confident you can make it happen. That was something that he did, and when guys in the band did that, he'd be the first to go, yeah. He wouldn't do what you might expect where he might come along and say, how dare you change your parts in the middle of my gig.
Yeah.
The complete opposite. He's really open and free to that.
And is there a lesson to be learned there? Because that's kind of aligns itself with the Portishead stuff as well. Because I know you had, even though you were not a full-time member of your session, but you had creativity in that as well. Yeah. Is there a lesson that you think that some session musicians are a bit underused, and there's a resource there creatively, and it's sometimes not tapped into.
Absolutely. It's like actors, isn't it? I mean, actors are always complaining that once they have a hit movie that they're in and they're starring in, that's it, they're typecast then. That's the catch. A great record can then mean that everybody expects you to be that forever, and they won't accept you doing the other thing that you've always been good at as well, or the other things that you might go on to be able to do. That's one of the other sides of success, whatever that is, you know. So, I mean, I started as a rock drummer, but with a keen interest in jazz and a keen sense of jazz. But it took me a long time to get my jazz thing happening. Excuse me. I've always felt a bit frustrated on those terms. I mean, I think one of the things that I think that one of my strong suits is I'm versatile. I chose to be versatile, and I went out of my way to be versatile. And so as soon as I finished playing a blues gig, I want to go and play something electronic. Well, as soon as I've done some electronic stuff, I want to go and play a rock and roll gig. Then I want to go and play some blues. I don't want to do something experimental. Then I want to do jazz, and then, you know, it never stops. It's always a frustration. And some people perceive me as a jazz drummer. Some people perceive me as a session drummer. Some people think I'm a rock drummer.
What do you perceive yourself as?
A schizophrenic lunatic. No, I am all those things. You know, I literally, I was taught by a jazz drummer in the beginning, mostly. But that was in the 70s when I started. It was the 70s, mid-70s. So, I had long hair. I wanted to be a rock drummer in a rock band. But I was fascinated by jazz. I didn't understand it, but I learned some of the basics of, you know, what is jazz drumming. And that's been, ever since then, I've had a foot in both camps. And it's just that through saying yes to anything and everything, I've broadened my skills and developed the ability to move between those two basic genres, you know, things that are swing and things that are rock and pop, and I'm still doing it now, in fact.
What advice or tips would you give to session musicians? Say if you're a session drummer and you're working with maybe a performer whose kind of musical vocabulary isn't what it might be, and you have to kind of interpret and translate. What advice would you give to someone in those situations for the first time? Because that must be tricky.
Yeah, that's the key of being a good session player. Really, is some musicians know, some artists know exactly what they want from you. Some have no idea really what they want from you. And that goes for producers as well. They might be, if you're a young player and you don't have a reputation, and you're turning up, you've been booked to do a session, right? Because you were recommended by a friend, or they saw you playing in the pub last night, and they thought, yeah, great, can you come and do the session? You know. So then you're suddenly there. If you don't have a reputation, you kind of don't have something to prove, and yet of course you do have something to prove. You're there. If you don't help them make the track that they're going to make, your reputation is going to be that you didn't help them to make the track. So the job is, what is it they're trying to make? Do you understand what they're trying to make? Can you give them that? Can you give them that with something else that they weren't expecting that makes them go, oh, that sounds great. That's kind of what we thought we were going to do, but it's better as well. That's what you want to hear ultimately. That's when you've done a good session that's worked really well. That's when I know I've really hit the mark. Is when they go, oh, it's great. You've made my song the way I thought it was going to be, but actually you've made it better than what I thought it was going to be. And usually, it's paying attention to the language people use. There's no one way of explaining this. You know, some people say, yeah, can you make it funky? Well, okay. Well, what do you mean by funky? I mean, there's so many different ways that could mean. You know, I mean, funk is in just 2 beats. Something could be funky or not. You know, the way that you even play the simplest of beats can imply something that's very straight and simple and humble, or it can have an attitude about it that implies something else. Understanding people's language is important. Understanding their musical references is important. And being receptive and ready to react to noticing when it's going right in the right direction for them as well as for you.
Yeah.
You know, it's all very well going in there. Like that's why I always laugh at all these YouTube videos of drummers doing all this show off technical playing on YouTube. It looks great, it's fantastic, brilliant. But 9 times out of 10, probably more than that, the vast majority of the time, if you're doing a session, you turn up and start playing loads of drum fills all over it and doing some flashy stuff. Most people will say, yeah, that's great, but that's not my tune. My tune is about this. My song needs this, needs that, you know.
Do you think it's always important then, therefore, for a session musician to have a creative outlet away from the session work, so that they don't feel stifled, if you like, in having to just play what someone else wants? It's probably their creativity is just slipping out.
The trouble with drummers is drummers have this thing about wanting to play drum solos and be super flash, and they're forgetting that a drum kit is a collection of instruments that are used to make a drum track. A bass drum, which comes, they're all separate instruments that make the drum kit. It doesn't mean that you have to play like you're doing a drum solo, or you don't have to play like you're trying to prove something every time you're on the drum kit. There's nothing wrong. But it's, you know, the great pieces of music that have any gravity in musical culture for the last 100 years or so are the simpler ideas that have been played with the right mental intent, because the guy that was playing it knew full well that he could play something far more flashy, but he used his understanding of rhythm, his understanding of his own playing, to play a phrase that worked with that verse or that lick or that chorus, and that's what made the track sound good. You know. And if someone says, oh yeah, that's great, can you give us a little 2-bar fill just there? That's often what you do get, is they want meat and potatoes that makes the song sound great. And it's up to you to work with simple elements, but place them and phrase them in a way that really does sit and make the track happen. And if there is a moment where they say, yeah, we really need a great drum fill to go into this section here, then that's when if you've done all your practicing in your bedroom, doing 1,000 miles an hour paradiddles and whatever, you know, gospel chops you've got ready to go, that's when you use it. But even then, you've got to ask yourself, what's the point of playing something really simple and funky and then doing a stupid drum fill that sounds like someone's showing off? It doesn't fit the character of the track. You know, it's all those same things. It's all those. You've got to censor yourself and produce yourself as well. You've got to put in your own head is try and imagine that you're a producer and you're evaluating your playing as you're doing it. Just in the same way, like I said earlier, if you're playing a beat and it's just the bass drum, the snare drum, the hi-hat, think, right, what's the most important part of these 3 elements? The bass drum, the snare drum, the hi-hat. Is one of them slightly louder than the other? Is one of them pushier than the other? Or are they changing? Are they fixed? Are they, you know, should it be predictable? Should it change and move a little bit? You know, little changes like that can make a massive difference to the way it comes out in the final mix. You know.
How does the music industry differ to what you expected it to be like before you kind of got into it full time? So growing up and thinking about going into the music industry, what it's like, what's the reality? What's it like, and how does it differ?
Well, it's still really, really tough. It always was. It still is, and it's tough in new ways that it wasn't when I started. There were many, many more places to play when I was younger. Right. In a lot of ways, because you know the whole culture of this country has changed. You know, many pubs have gone by the wayside, so the pub culture, the pub gig scene is nowhere near what it was. And then obviously the digital revolution is the biggest change. You know, that has had a huge effect on what's feasible, what's viable. You know, the money that used to be in the record business is not there anymore. It's simply not there. Only with bands that suddenly get a big success, they might start to be able to behave and do things that everybody would take for granted 30 years ago. You know, it's much harder in that way. But as I said, it's always been tough. It's never been easy. It can't be easy because I mean, the amount of festivals that exist around Europe, around the world, I mean, it's enormous. How that's, you know, so there's always more than enough artists to fill the stages. There's not that many who are actually doing anything really special that really makes the music industry as strong as it used to be, I don't think, because people don't seem to write hit songs like they used to, and people's what passes as performance now, to my way of thinking, is
why is that? Do we think it's because we're recording in ways we can do loads of takes and we'll edit it afterwards? Do you think the skill level
I think the skill level has changed because everybody's just it's so easy to use Pro Tools and to do it, in a workstation and that kind of build a track that way, build music that way, and there's nothing wrong with that you can make great music that way, obviously you can, but it doesn't make for a performance. When switching some machines on and pressing a few buttons is not a performance for me personally. You can the music can be great, but it's not a performance. I think everyone who's honest knows that. And a lot of the bands that are out there who are trying to do a performance with a lot of electronic gear, a lot of what you're hearing is just a backing track, and they're not really performing. They're just going through the motions with the gear doing all the work, really. Which is why when a good band who really do perform, it hits hard. It really does. I mean, that's why we love the Sleaford Mods. The Sleaford Mods is the greatest expression to me of where we're at, because it's got that fantastic edginess of a punk gig, but no one's there pretending they're doing something difficult, running the backing track. He presses the button, it plays, at the end he stops it, he drinks beer in the middle. He's not doing what all DJs do, trying to make out that he's doing something terribly difficult. It's way more honest.
Well, I mean, you must
way more authentic.
You're playing to big festivals. Who else is it that you've seen that you've kind of really landed with you? Is anyone you've seen recently on the festival shows you've done in the last year or so?
Well, I've been when you're on tour with Radiohead, you're in a bit of a bubble, so I don't get to see half as many things that I'd like to see. Johnny Greenwood's other project that was the support for Radiohead was absolutely fantastic. June. I just fell in love with that and was watching it every single night. It's just an amazing thing to behold. They won the audiences over in ways that was what's the word I'm looking for? The cynicism of some of those American audiences was won over by that band again and again.
What makes Johnny so unique? I mean, he's a great guitarist, but he's a great all-round musician.
He is a great all-round musician. I mean, his guitar, if you really look at his guitar playing technique, it's so weird, it's so unorthodox. But everything he does is, the way he moves between instruments and uses ideas is extraordinary. Jeff Barrow is a bit like that as well. Jeff Barrow is, you don't get to fully see what Jeff Barrow is. It's his ideas. It's like the Bowie thing of taking completely disparate things and bringing them together in a way that when you hear it or see it, you get that great art realization moment of, oh, why didn't I think of that? It's such a great, why didn't I think of putting that with that? It was sitting there, why didn't I think of that?
Thom Yorke, obviously a genius, one of the greatest musicians of his generation. What would a musician learn again, it's a similar question to the one with Robert Plant, but what makes him unique? What would a musician, if you're working with him for a short period of time, what would they pick up on and develop in their own skill set, having worked with Thom as opposed to anyone else?
I mean, because he's such a kind of complete creative force in his own right, he could carry on working by himself quite easily and make records entirely by himself if he chose to. They wouldn't sound like Radiohead, they'd sound like, obviously solo projects, but he's got he's got such a strong sense of why he's doing what he's doing, and I don't quite understand, where it comes from. His art training at university. It comes from his all the work that he's put in and things he's learnt. It's funny. No, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know. I mean, I can only speak for myself. I don't know what other people learn from. You can't force someone to see or hear something if they don't hear it.
Yeah.
You hear what you hear when you hear it. I mean, there's hearing and there's listening, but then there's really taking something in.
What about in rehearsals and that kind of thing, to making sure that everything is nailed down? Is it something that, it's when you do rehearsals with Radiohead for new stuff, is it a case that everyone's heard it before and are you working on it as a team, or do you learn it as the record and then come in?
No, there's none of that. Oh, it's got to sound like the record thing.
Yeah.
I mean, no, they don't. In fact, I kept trying to do that in the beginning when I was first rehearsing. I thought they must surely want it to sound more or less like the record, and time and time again, examples occurred where if you played something that sounded interesting or had a slightly new quirk to it, and Thom picked up on it, that was it. Like, hey, that's great, we'll do that again, and so you do it again, and suddenly the tune is tilted into a slightly new place. There was what was it? One day I was playing a tambourine with one hand and playing bass drum and snare drum with the other hand. So being, I can't remember what I was playing now, but I played some beat, and he picked up on it straight away. He said, "Hey, that's great," and we started playing. What were we doing? I can't even remember the track now. It's gone. But he made us play a tune, and we did that several times, and then we stopped doing it.
Yeah.
So there's none of that kind of. He's got a freewheeling approach. He's not nailed down. That's one of Thom's strengths. Is he's not scared, like Robert. He's not scared to take risks. He's not scared to change something if he gets bored with it. There aren't any fixed rules. It's a case of, does that sound good? Does it work? Let's do it like that. If 3 gigs later it suddenly doesn't sound quite as good as it did when we first did it, then we stop doing it.
Yeah.
It's quite simple, really, in one way.
You recorded Full Stop, didn't you, in the studio?
I played on Full Stop, yeah. So
because there was an earlier live version of that.
We were doing it live. Then they did the album, and I went in and played on the album. But the way they were recording the album, I could only really do a small little contribution to it based on what we'd already been doing. And then after the album came out and we were rehearsing to tour that album, Moonshaped Pool, we started playing that tune, Full Stop. And it's quite a difficult tune to play. It's fast, it's in 6, and everything's on offbeats. So it's very easy to get lost. Where's the one gone? That kind of thing. And we started rehearsing it, and then and then I started doing the old jazzy hot hi-hat thing. I'm always doing that. I'm always doing it on purpose to annoy Adrian Utley in Portishead. And Johnny heard it, and he went, "Wow, what's that?" And so I played it a bit more, and I started playing it in the beginning of Full Stop, which I didn't do on the record, and they loved it. So that suddenly became the intro, the first half of the track. Then I went back to the pattern that I play on the album, although you don't hear it very much on the album. It's not really up in the mix very much. And again, no sooner did they fixed it in the recording, we then started to change it and rebuild it and perform it in a different way live, and that's continued to move on like that. Other tunes, Lotus Flower was pretty much like the record. Me and Phil, when we played that together.
Did you play those two parts together on the record, or
no? That was being performed before, and then they were recording it in a different way. And then when we performed it again in the last couple of years, I've ended up playing. I play more on there than there's on the record again.
Right.
So again, nothing is bolted down and permanently forever. There isn't
the songs evolve.
Yeah, they evolve. They continue to evolve. Which obviously is a great thing. If they don't, then obviously it's not moving forward. So
static, which is what Tom doesn't
static,
want.
then what's the next step? Oh dear, going backwards.
Yeah. Nigel Godrich, you must have recorded with him on Full Stop. Is that right? The producer Nigel Godrich.
He was. Yeah, obviously he was there.
He was there. Do you know? I mean, I don't know how much you've seen of their relationship, but I wondered what makes Nigel Godrich so trusted by Radiohead, because he's done pretty much most of their stuff.
Yeah, they obviously have a relationship that has worked for them. Yeah.
What's he like as a producer? Did you have much interaction with him, or not really?
Not particularly, no. And they were recording to tape and using like a big loop system. I tried to get him to explain to me what was going on, but there was too much happening for me. I didn't quite understand the technique, but no, it was all a bit too full on, really.
Exit Music.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Great song. On the record, and they do manage it live as well. They have the fucking best fuzz bass sound ever.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if it's synthetic, like if it's on synths or if it's Colin playing it.
As far as I'm aware, it's just effects pedals ramped up.
Colin's playing.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. But when it comes in, when he comes in on that, I always kind of look round and think, yeah, that is a bass guitar going through some effects pedals, isn't it? Because it's monstrous sound.
It's monstrous. So powerful.
Very up in the mix, also it dominates.
So let's talk about the very special show at Glastonbury last year. Glastonbury is a festival that's very close to Radiohead's heart. And it was a very special, also from the audience's point of view. It was a great day. I was very lucky to be there. I was doing some work there. And as I mentioned earlier, just before you went on stage, I was helping out a charity which had this karaoke tent. And Phil Selway's sister got up and sung karaoke, would you believe? Can you guess what song she sang?
So it either is a Radiohead track or not a Radiohead track.
It wasn't. It was a Foo Fighters song. She didn't even sing her own brothers' music. And yeah, absolutely. And bless her, when she finished, she said, "You can tell where all the musical talent in our family went," which is great. Then I literally ran to see your set, and it was the reason it was so special from my perspective was that I've seen Radiohead 10, 12 times. And it was the first time I really sensed that Radiohead really embraced and loved playing some of the old stuff. It always struck me in the past that sometimes it was a bit of a kind of, we have to do this, we have to play some of the old stuff. Is it a case that when some of those old songs are discussed in rehearsals, it's like, roll of the eyes, oh, we've got to do this one? Or, do you sense the same enthusiasm for all of their back catalogue from them when they're playing?
I think the rolling of the eyes is reduced because with two drummers, there are possibilities and there's a dynamic now to play all of the material on the same rules that I've already explained. So if you rehearse the tunes and everything is more or less sounding groovy and happening and it's got an energy and it feels good, then they'll get played. Those will get checked on sound checks from time to time, and if they don't feel and sound like they're doing the business, they'll get dropped. So that's the criteria. So if there's rolling of the eyes, it might be some small detail that suddenly becomes a problem. It might be a sound problem with an effects pedal or whatever. But I've done my best while I've been there to put energy and invigorate any of the tunes that they choose to do. either by playing added percussion, or if I'm doing a new thing with Phil where we're kind of interlocking a drum part that wasn't there before, or if I'm playing it, you know, it's finding good solutions, finding things that make the thing happen, you know. We played Mixomatosis.
Big tune.
That's become a very strong thing. Phil plays the main part, and I'm adding all the swingy, shuffly stuff over the top, and hits and accents. Again, for me, that's Earl Palmer. Again, that's blues, jazz drumming. You know, what other tunes? No, I don't know. It's.
What's your contribution to Paranoid Android? Because that's a complex piece of music. That's, you know.
I'm just playing maracas on that.
Oh, nice. Well, you brought the energy.
Yeah. Well, and same thing though. See, I think some people would. I know they do. They're like, oh, I'm just playing maracas. Or I'm just playing tambourine. For me, it's all the same. When I play the maracas, it's like, right, I'm going to make that maraca sit right in there so that it's doing this. You know, that's what I'm always trying to do all the time when I play, even if it's just a tiny little.
Well, it was a huge. I mean, it was a great concept. What was it like from your perspective? Was it particularly enjoyable playing?
Oh, it's great because I've been a Radiohead fan way before I got to play with them. So you know, there are plenty of times I'm laughing because I'm just thinking, it's great. I get to play. I mean, the best one for me was Airbag. The first time we rehearsed, and we were getting into the bit where they were starting to pull out all the old tunes.
Yeah.
And they played Airbag, and I sat and watched. And I noticed that at the beginning, Colin would pick up the sleigh bells, because there's sleigh bells on the recording.
Right.
Colin plays about 4 bars of sleigh bells while John is going down, 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 down. And then, of course, then he puts the sleigh bells down and I start playing the bass. So I let them play the whole tune, got to the end and went, wow, that sounds great, guys. Can I suggest that maybe I play the sleigh bells for the whole thing? And they went, oh, go on, let's try it. So I picked up the sleigh bells and just stood there going jing, 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 jing through the whole thing. And when we got to the end of it, they all laughed their heads off, you know, because it was the first time they'd had sleigh bells through the whole tune. And because I made sure that the sleigh bells really rocked on the, you know, bang, 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 kept it swinging along. I thought, this is going to be great. I get to play along with all these amazing pieces of music. And I'm kind of it's like watching it, but being part of it at the same time. Yeah.
Fantastic. What do you think the future holds for Radiohead?
No idea.
What do you think the future holds for Portishead?
No idea.
What's your most important piece of music memorabilia? What's the thing that you've got that you really, really treasure?
Yeah, there's a photograph I've got at home. When I was with Robert, we played in Norway, Tromsø, at the Nelson Mandela 6446.
Did you?
Charity event for his AIDS awareness thing in Africa. And we went to the hotel there. I've been in Norway many times, so we go to the hotel and we were told Nelson Mandela is coming to this gig. Robert's going to meet him. You know, Annie Lennox was there, Brian May was there, Peter Gabriel was there. You know, big event, huge event. So our tour manager said, "Okay, tomorrow, guys, we're going to this other hotel for the thing. You know, Robert's going to meet Nelson Mandela." Oh, great, okay. So we go along, and I just thought we were going to be standing around kicking our heels for a few hours, you know, waiting while, you know. So I didn't particularly. I was dressed quite. I didn't bother to dress any different from what I had on, you know. And we go to this other hotel, and we're suddenly ushered into a big conference room, and we all sit around round tables, each band and artist. And we wait. There's sort of a lot of hubbub in the room. Suddenly, the doors at the back of the room open, and Nelson Mandela's people start to come in, and then eventually in comes Nelson Mandela. The vibe in the room just changed. It was like the ultimate headmaster came in. You know? It's like all the celebrities that were there, suddenly they all took a peg down. Nelson Mandela walked in, and the atmosphere in the room was just extraordinary. It was incredible. I usually get very emotional telling this story because and he came in, and they put a big chair in the middle of the room, like a throne basically, and he sat in the chair. And then one by one they started calling out names, and people would go up and walk up to him, shake his hand, stand next to the chair, and they took pictures. And then when they finally got to Robert Plant, Robert stood up and he started to walk, and then someone said, "You've got to go, you've all got to go." So, you're kidding. So suddenly we're walking towards Nelson Mandela, and my turn comes, and I walk towards him. I'm looking right into his eyes, and I shake his hand, and it was unbelievably moving. I can't tell you how powerful the experience it was, to look into that face and to shake his hand. And then suddenly I'm standing in a line behind the chair, and the picture's taken, and I have that picture at home, and to me it's one of my prized possessions without a doubt.
What a
It
beautiful
was an extraordinary day. The whole thing was incredible.
Yeah.
The whole event. And so when he died, for me it was like many people. Anyone who met him who had. I mean, he's a giant. Obviously, you don't even need to say it. Everybody knows he's a giant figure, And it's great. It's great to see how the Tory party have to try and hide the fact that they, said he was a terrorist.
Yeah.
And all the terrible things that they did and said about him. I love the fact that they're embarrassed by that now. Yeah. Makes me very happy.
So we'll begin to wrap up. Last couple of questions. What ambitions do you still have left musically?
To keep evolving. I'm really enjoying working. There's a band called HeadShy. When I was at Glastonbury, I also played with a band called HeadShy.
Okay.
That weekend, and that's an ongoing project I'm working with, where I get to play a lot of what I do with really great songs, and hoping we're going to be performing soon. I'm using more electronics now than I've done before. I've got a Moog DFAM that I've just got on while I was way out with Radiohead. I also, because of the German experience I had, I'm very fortunate. I got to buy the drums, the Nagara drums from Natu Solanki, the drummer in that band. So I'm learning to play Nagara drums.
Okay. How do they differ, just for anyone who isn't?
Well, okay. So if you imagine two drums that basically look a little bit like a wok with a drum head on.
Oh yeah, yeah.
A large one with a buffalo hide on it, which is like a bass drum.
Yeah.
And one about half its size, which has got a real plastic head. They're like little mini kettle drums, little mini timpani. The sticks are used. There's a skinny stick and a thick one. The thick one plays on the right hand on the bigger drum, and the drums kind of face into one another, and you're playing in a very enclosed space. They're not the heads are not level. They're at an angle. And they're very loud and they're very dynamic, and it's a very shuffly. Well, it's not entirely, but a lot of what I saw Natu playing was very shuffle-based, swingy kind of stuff that sounds a bit like tabla Indian drumming that most people would imagine, but way more dynamic and much more. I'm a fan. I watch him every night and studied, and I got some lessons from him as well.
Great.
So I'm hoping to sort of do some of that.
Do you do tutoring? Do you do lessons for?
Not really. No, I'm always too busy.
Yeah.
Here and there I've given a few people a couple of lessons. I did an online lesson for a guy in New York that he said helped him.
Master classes do you do?
Oh yeah, I do. I have done some master classes for colleges and universities. I steered clear for years. I didn't like that word, the master class word. It took a long time for me to get used to the idea of.
But I'm sure many people listening to this would have learned a lot. Final question then is a question we ask all guests. What fears do you have for the music industry looking forward, and how might those fears be addressed?
My fears are that the age-old sort of nasty tricks that record companies used to do in the early days of the 60s, where they just stitched artists up and paid them nothing but pittance, that's just all being played out again by the streaming companies. The deals that people have given are just appalling. It's the same thing. It's just a digital version of the same old trick. The big record companies, of course, are making money for old rope. They just relicensed their existing back catalogues through these systems. And the age-old thing that's very hard to get across to young musicians is don't sell yourself so cheap, because if you made something good, it's got value. But of course, record companies and record company people, what they're very good at is enticing young artists who are gagging to play and gagging to perform and gagging to make records. They're so keen to do that.
And
it's easy to exploit.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get them to agree to terms that are just insanely exploitative.
To put numbers to this, just to contextualise this, I know Jeff uploaded his PRS statement a couple of years ago, and it showed that from 34 million streams of Dummy, or it might have been actually all of Portishead stuff, it got $2,500 or $2,500.
Yeah.
That's all it was.
That's the world we live in now.
Yeah.
That's the extent of the greed. It's greed. It's nothing. It's as simple as that. These big streaming companies are. It's thievery. They're just taking the piss.
What can we do? What's the change that's got to happen? How can we facilitate?
I wish I knew for sure. I mean, the fact that vinyl has made its comeback is really encouraging, because there is at least that record store day. The fact that you can still make a record and get it pressed and sell those as real things that people can buy and they can play them. It's how you get it back to the point where a good record can be made and sold, and so there's a chance of it being viable. It's always a good record is always potentially viable.
Yeah.
It's just a case of the process that the distribution deal and the advertising for it. It's just the cost of that and the people doing it, whether they're going to do it on a fair basis or not. And because, like most things now, like a run of shoes, you might find a shoe you like, and then 6 months later they don't make them anymore. Same with pop music, especially mainstream pop music. Get a hit record, that's it, and then you dispense with the artist unless they've got more to offer.
What can young musicians do to not be exploited? How can they get clued up enough to not be exploited? It's very difficult, isn't it?
It is very difficult. I wish I knew what the answer was. Good management, but how do you find good management? How do you tell what good management are when you're learning the ropes as you go? I think maybe there's still a lot to be said for the old way of doing it. Just build it up gradually. Just be realistic and one step at a time, and you build up a following. You make good records, and you do it on a scale that you can manage. The streaming thing, I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. I wish I was. I really do wish I was.
It's a tricky world at the moment. Well, thank you so much for appearing. I mean, you've helped facilitate, produce and contribute on records that mean a lot to a lot of people, that will be listened to for generations to come. Keep breaking new ground, challenging and stretching the listener, as that's where every great art should be. Thanks for your wisdom and insight, Clive, and we hope you enjoyed appearing on the StageLeft Podcast.
Thanks, Chris.
Wow, what a privilege it was to sit in my lounge in Vauxhall with Clive and just talk creativity, talk drums, talk Radiohead, Portishead. What a great joy that was. Thank you so much to Clive for appearing. He had so much wisdom, so many ideas around creativity, and just such a nice man, and so insightful for all of us. I think there's a lot that we can take from that, whether we're a drummer or not, into our own lives. even if we're not musicians, I think there's a lot we can take from that. So thank you so much to Clive. If you're a listener for the first time and you're a drummer, for instance, and you like that particular episode, then you'll also like Wolfgang Fleur of Kraftwerk on the moment he created the world's first ever electronic drum set. And you could argue actually some of the sounds that Clive plays on now wouldn't exist if it hadn't been for some of the stuff Kraftwerk did. So if you're a drummer, you might find that of interest, because they were kind of 25, 30 years ahead of their time when it came to creating electronic sounds. And other episodes, of course, with Tony Visconti on producing David Bowie's final album Black Star, and the creative processes behind some of the production techniques. And we've had the likes of Gem Archer of Oasis, Stuart Lee the comedian, loads and loads of episodes that are worth checking out. Richard Fortas of Guns N' Roses, that's a good one as well. If you're interested in attending one of our events that we mentioned, so the StageLeft Nights, which is a dinner around our place in Vauxhall. There's only 8 seats around the table, and we have a former guest of the StageLeft podcast come around, and we have a 5-course meal cooked by an amazing chef, Dovile, and we have live music, so there'll be live performance, and like a vinyl record playback as well. Please get in touch if you're interested in attending. Some former guests have already agreed, and some people who've never been on the podcast before, who are really kind of well-established, well-known musicians, are up for playing a few songs in the lounge. So that's going to be fun. So get in touch if you'd like to, and to do that, it's stageleft@gmail.com, and of course you can also follow us on Twitter at the StageLeft Pod, like us on Facebook at facebook.com/the StageLeft Podcast, and we've got an Instagram page as well, which is at the StageLeft Podcast, where you see some behind-the-scene photos and that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's it for now. We hope you enjoyed it. Please get in touch and give us feedback, and check out former episodes if you haven't heard them yet. Thanks so much. See you next time.